Well, Vice President Pence visited the heavily guarded demilitarized zone separating North and South Korea this morning. And in remarks later on, the vice president said that while the U.S. hopes to achieve a denuclearized Korean peninsula through peaceful means, all options are on the table.
Just in the past 2 weeks, the world witnessed the strength and resolve of our new president in actions taken in Syria and Afghanistan. North Korea would do well not to test his resolve.
All right, so let us bring in Zeke Miller. He is a CBSN political contributor and a White House reporter for Time, joining me now from Washington. Zeke, so listen, we heard what the vice president had to say. Some tough talk. What do you make of the rhetoric that you're hearing?
You know, this is really in line with where the Trump administration has been over the last month or so. We heard similar rhetoric a few weeks ago from Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. President Donald Trump has been very vocal about North Korea on Twitter and then in a couple of press conferences over the last couple of weeks. Certainly, you know, the Trump administration is trying to signal a break from where the Obama administration was, which was that policy of essentially strategic patience, trying to create diplomatic pressure on North Korea. That did not work. We know that North Korea was a subject that President Obama, in his conversations with then incoming President Donald Trump, that was a significant sort of focal point of their conversation, where the outgoing and incoming president shared this is something that he's worried about, and the intelligence community has sort of escalated their warnings of the last several months to a year about sort of just how close North Korea is coming. So there is definitely a policy shift happening here, but it's not really clear what the rhetoric means. The end of what exactly is the if they're not continuing the Obama administration's policy, what is their policy? That's sort of the big wild card right now.
Yeah, that's been the question sort of all along in a number of different areas, actually. And the president didn't comment on the failed missile test directly, but he did tweet yesterday that it wouldn't make sense for him to label China as a currency manipulator since they're working with us on North Korea. Could that transactional approach turn out to be effective? What do you make of it?
I mean, certainly they would be getting a lot less help from China if the president were to have labeled China a currency manipulator last week, which was something that was obviously a core campaign promise of his. He said he would do one of the things he said he would almost do on day one. It's not clear that the transactional sort of linking those two issues really works, but it is, pretty obvious that if he were to do one, he wouldn't get help on the other. So it's interesting that we see the president sort of the deal maker. We get a window into how he views foreign policy, but as a transactional approach, rather than sort of, there are a lot of things happening in parallel. That it is a give and take. It is not clear yet, though. We've seen some tough editorials out of sort of Russian state-owned media, but sort of just what is out of Chinese state-owned media, just how far is China willing to go here to actually put pressure on North Korea? That missile test on Saturday was not a good step.
Right. The president has been very active on Twitter, even for him over the weekend, on all sorts of other issues. Yesterday, he called out demonstrators who took to the streets demanding that he release his tax returns. I'm looking right here where he has a reading suggestion, a great book for your reading enjoyment, Reasons to Vote for Democrats. If anybody knows about that book, it was really, it was selling a lot on Amazon. It's basically a book of empty pages, a little bit of a joke. What does he accomplish? We're dealing now with some pretty weighty issues around the globe, and he's tweeting about joke books and other things.
Yeah, I mean, the president is also facing that special election in Georgia tomorrow, where John Ossoff, sort of the Democratic candidate, is. It appears to be doing fairly well in some of the polls. It's a bit of a jungle primary, so we don't really know exactly how that's going to shake up. But it can go a bunch of different ways. But it is a real test for Republicans, and has become in some ways a referendum on the president. So he's worried. He's trying to galvanize his base, trying to misdirect and fire up his supporters. Things like these, that joke tweet, or the way the White House views it, the way Capitol Hill views it, is sort of just ignore it. It doesn't really mean anything. It's just a messaging signal to the Trump supporters. But you're right. It does sort of pose an interesting question when there are all of these weighty issues going on around the globe, that he is devoting his time to this. Obviously, presidents can do politics and can do foreign policy simultaneously, but it does raise questions.
Right, indeed. Zeke Miller of Time, thank you so much, Zeke.
Thanks for having me.